Welcome to System Talk. My name is Gitta Peyn. I'm from Germany. It's 5 p.m. in the afternoon here in Germany. Steven, you're in California. It's early in the morning, and how's the weather?
The weather, Gita, is smoky. We have a new forecast methodology now. It's not whether the sun is shining, because it never does. It's simply this pall of smoke that covers everything due to all the wildfires we have raging up and down the state. But if it wasn't for that, it would be a lovely summer day.
Are there fires nearby?
The nearest one is approximately 60, 80 kilometers away. But they are all up and down the coast of North America. So everybody is in California, Oregon, Washington is getting the smoke.
No.
Not a lot of structures, mostly in the forests, but still very bad for the whole situation.
Yes, and your opinion, is this normal or due to climate change or both?
Yeah, we've always had fires, but when the forests were run naturally, there would be small fires, they would burn themselves out. But with climate change, everything's warming up. And with human intervention, we have tried to stop the fires for many decades, and that has led to an increase in fuel load. So when the fire does start, it runs out of control and it's very difficult to stop. And so we're starting to learn that we need to do controlled burns and try to lower the fuel load in a natural way. But unfortunately, we also have a lot of people who, under the old system, have moved out into the forest to enjoy the beauty of nature, and their houses burned down a lot. So that's not good.
No,
so there's all these interrelated parts that have to be figured out.
Yeah, that's exactly one of the reasons why I wanted to talk to you. So again, welcome. So, to our audience, I have to synchronize my video and audio every once in a while, so do not wonder if I'm off and on again. I'm still there all the time. Okay, Steven, you started with a career in the field of engineering, but then you took a dramatic change one day, and now you're one of the most, in my opinion, fascinating systems and systemic researchers. Can you tell us a little bit more about yourself and what inspired you to change?
Yes, actually, it was when I was young, I was very interested in science fiction and science and technology. I found out that my math skills were not quite up to par, so I was not going to become a nuclear physicist. I was not going to develop atomic rockets. So I went into engineering and worked in a variety of fields there. At the local water department. While I was working, this is before I was working there, I was wandering through a library, and I saw this old book, and this book said that if we study society scientifically for 100 years, then we would understand the problems of the world and we would be able to solve the problems of the world. And for a young man, this was very exciting. And the book was more than 100 years old. So according to a very young perspective, we must have all the answers. All I needed to do was study a thing called sociology. Got married too early, went to work, as I said, worked in a variety of fields. While I was working, I went back to school at night and earned my degree in sociology. And I was rather unhappy to find that sociology did not have all the answers. But it did awaken in me a very strong motivation to do good in the world. I realized that there is something here that I might be able to do to make the world a better place that's even more useful than inventing an atomic rocket. So I went on to get my master's degree in organization development, which was very systems focused. And I learned a lot of great techniques for facilitation, for training, for education, team building, decision making, all of those things. But the big answers were still not there. I still had those big questions. How do we understand the world? Bringing people together for mutual understanding was great, but it didn't quite, it just felt that something was missing. So I was, moping around the house, and my second wife kicked me in the butt and said, well, why don't you go for your PhD? Oh yeah, okay, sounds good to me. So I attended Fielding Graduate University, and wonderful people, self-paced study program. So I was able to move through it very quickly, especially using some accelerated learning techniques that I'd written about in the previous book, and also some techniques I developed along the way using a systems theory approach to learning. So I was working on my PhD, and as you know, there's the literature review. Like, let me scan the literature, see what theories might be relevant to my interest. And I focused on complex adaptive systems theory. Okay, that's pretty good. And I found 20 different versions. No two of them were exactly alike. They all contained different concepts. And I go, which one do I use? So I went to my mentor, Bob Silverman, brilliant man, probably the best read individual I have ever met. Unbelievable amount of knowledge passes through his mind, and he keeps most of it too, unlike me. I asked him, did I miss a course here or something? How do I choose which one? And he said, Steve, don't worry about it. Just pick one, explain why you chose it, make sure it's related to your study, and move on. Don't waste a lot of time there. And my jaw just hit the floor. I was flabbergasted. I realized that the light bulbs went off in my head saying, this is the problem of the social sciences. We have no way of rationally, objectively, rigorously choosing between our theories, our models, our conceptual systems. And this goes on to the broader population as well. We have all these different political factions who are completely at loggerheads, and for the same reason, they believe that they're right, and they don't have a way to objectively look at their own mindsets to see what might be there and what might not. So I changed the entire focus of my dissertation to study conceptual systems, the theories, the models, the concepts, the structures, and developed a new structural perspective of looking at those theories. And that led to now over 40 peer-reviewed publications, a plain language textbook, a Fulbright project in Germany, a visiting professor researcher in Naples, some awards, but as we were hinting at before, the most fun thing is connecting with scholars and practitioners such as yourself all over the world and sharing exciting ideas and directions for action.
Thank you. Fascinating. Your SOCS approach to the structure of knowledge has led to dozens of peer-reviewed publications, as you said. Can you tell us a little bit more about the method and its importance concerning the problems and challenges of our time? From my perspective, I think we have to take mankind with us, yeah, into a new systemic world. And we as scientists, it is important to me to always think and talk about how to make stuff easy, yeah, for everybody, so everybody can follow, so that citizen scientists can engage into the research processes, etc. What's your standpoint on this, please?
At the risk of making a short answer, Gitta, I am in 100% agreement, not only because I as a human believe that humans should survive, that's purely selfish, but it's a good starting point, but also the simplicity. A pragmatic approach, I think, is critically important. We have spent a long time drifting off as an academic society into a postmodern world of fragmentation where we have 20 different versions of one theory. Or as I looked up recently, there's over 4 million papers on sustainability. That's probably 4 million different theoretical perspectives. And that does not really serve to help us. I mean, let me try a metaphor on you here really quickly. If this model is a metaphorical representation of a simple theory where each ball represents a concept and the connectors represent the causal relations between them, you might have one group that views the world like this, and they see two concepts and two connections. Another group might view the world as a different two concepts. And perhaps by bringing them together, we can help them agree that there's multiple concepts and multiple connections that they need to understand the world. And I think that is the state of the art for an organization development or collaborative approach to gaining understanding. With a structural approach, what we do is we look at those connections and concepts, and we realize that the structure itself is missing something, and that by completing that structure, we come up with a model, a theory that is still more complete and more useful for pragmatically engaging the world. And so that in a metaphor is the basics of our approach. It's difficult to look at it in terms of making things simpler, because that leads us to a reductionist approach of classic science, which does not seem to work very well, has not served very well for advancing the social sciences. And so what we're looking at now is, rather than a postmodern approach where anything goes and we just create as many concepts as possible, instead, we're looking to synthesize those many concepts into a more rigorous and more useful structure. And the plain language approach is very much why we wrote our textbook in a plain language way. And we did that because, in part, because we were drawing on many different fields of study. And so rather than throw in jargon from many different fields of study, we just resorted to plain language approach, which anybody coming off the street could read and understand, rather than spend their lives trying to learn a new language so that they could then communicate with other people who happen to learn that language.
When you look at modern education, what, in your own opinion, is the most wrong thing about it?
Oh, dear. I've dabbled in this a little bit. I'm not an expert on education, but I have written a bit in that field, which is, for those interested in interdisciplinary work, as a side note, structure works for every field. So all of a sudden, you're not necessarily a top expert in the field, but you can get into it, understand it, and write cogently something that might be useful in a field fairly quickly and easily. For education, the classic view of putting students in rows and pushing them to memorize by rote has a small bit of validity, but then you very quickly end up with students that are differentiated, those that learn very quickly using that method and are then bored and they're wasting their time and they're learning to hate education. They are not learning how to learn, which is the single loop, double loop, triple loop learning. If we engage the students and help them learn how to learn, give them some control over their own process of learning, then they tend to learn much more rapidly and much more completely. I would say that is it in a nutshell. But yes, and there's the whole political side about how the educational system is under the control of the politicians, which does not help. Decades ago, one of the benefits for those of you who think that being young is the greatest thing in the world, I can't argue completely against that, but one of the great things about being a little bit older is you have some perspective. Because I remember decades ago when the politicians were saying, oh, we need to cut funding in education. The schools have too much money. We need to reduce the amount of money to improve education. And like, wait a minute, I'm not sure that makes a lot of sense. And what we've seen now, we are reaping the rewards of that with a less educated electorate who are making decisions not based on critical thinking, but based on a very reductionist thinking. So I think that speaks to one of the tremendous limitations of the educational system in general. It frustrates me to see that there are so many innovations in education and accelerated learning that are not being applied, or are being applied only in small local areas. Around California, there have been a number of charter schools where parents and teachers have set off to create their own school, and for a while they run wonderfully, and then inertia or something takes over, and then they kind of reach a norm, and they might still be better than the typical public school, but still they are not sustainable, which suggests, goes back, in my opinion, to the lack of understanding of our social sciences. We don't know how to do these things. Going back to my my youth and my enjoyment of science fiction and the Star Trek future where everybody gets along wonderfully, it's not so much the technology. We see a lot of excitement in the education world about using computers. Wonderful. But using them for what? Are we using them in the right way? Do we have the social technology to understand how to use our physical technology in the right way? Because clearly we don't have the ability to understand our own children, our own students, to motivate them, to get them interested in learning, and to encourage their learning in a highly effective way so that they grow up to be highly effective adults. Yeah, there is, for years we've recognized in the United States that there is an anti-intellectual sentiment. We have, some entrepreneur becomes a billionaire because he decided to go along with some great invention instead of going to school, and suddenly millions of children are saying, the answer here is to not go to school. Like, whoa, 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 wait a minute, that's the wrong lesson to learn. Or children who grew up thinking that they can become basketball stars or football stars. Whoa, wrong lesson to learn. Statistically speaking, that's not necessarily going to work for you. So, which probably cycles back to the whole process of educating our students in the importance of statistics and education.
Wonderful, thank you. You have a lot of hobbies here, I see. You love to drink wine, good wine. I think Californian wine, or what's your specialty? What do you like the most?
I developed a philosophy early on of if you find an agricultural region that suits you, that's comfortable, the wines there seem to be good for you. And with my international perspective, I'm comfortable in California, in South Africa, in France, in Germany along the Rheingau. There are just so many good wines all over the world. It's my liver will not keep up with my tongue, I'm afraid. So as I do get older, I have to limit myself a little bit. But it is a way of understanding a people and a region and an agricultural area by flavor, by smell. So that is just another wonderful way to engage the world. And it's wonderful with food. I enjoy cooking, sitting with friends. And of course, if you're doing philosophy, wine is absolutely essential.
Yeah. Yeah. And you love to fence, you play chess, you drive your sidecar, Igor. What came to my mind in context of education, I often see that the less educated people are, in the sense you are mentioning here, the less hobbies they have. That might be just a personal observation, and it's me, but I thought about how important it might be, especially today, in your opinion, to have hobbies that challenge you a little, to explore yourself. I think people who have no hobbies, who have no interest in things, who are only in social media, etc., etc., I think they are a systemic result of the problems of our time. What's your idea on this?
Gitta, I love talking with you. That is, I had not heard that before phrased in that way, but that sounds like it makes a lot of sense. Yes, I would agree on many dimensions there. First of all, yes, I think our world is so confusing, so chaotic, that we're seeing a lot of individuals and groups sort of hunkering down and striving for simplicity, even if the path to achieving that simplicity involves destruction. We see a lot of terrorist groups are also fundamentalist groups. They want to restore, the 14th century law. They want to go back to a time when law is just contained in one single book, or one single autocrat's ideas, which would be a very difficult way to live in some ways, but in other ways it would be relatively simple. Some of us would find it very stressful, I'm afraid. So we're working against that sort of thing, because I don't think you can, as they say, put the genie back in the bottle. It would be tremendously difficult to take this amazing world we have with all of its problems and try to go back to living in the 14th century. It's nice for a weekend or a vacation, but it's not an era that I would want to live in. I've suffered from cancer, and so I'm very happy that modern medicine exists in its form. And I'm very happy that we have this technology that allows us to communicate around the world. Such things, yeah, they're absolutely important. But let me speak just very briefly to another thing that you brought up, is more educated, more hobbies, more chances for self-exploration. I started fencing as a way to maintain my health, and I'm an average fencer overall, what we call a C rating on a scale of A, B, C, D, E. So average, not bad. I'm not going to the Olympics anytime unless I buy a ticket. But I have a lot of fun, and I've found one of the reasons I'm not highly successful is that I seem to lack a killer instinct. Now, you see, everybody's okay, we're ready to fight. It's like, oh, let's start with a group hug. I started out thinking, well, let me meditate before I start fencing. Oh, that just made me so relaxed. I didn't want to even stand up. So, and that, on the other hand, working with a lot of teenagers has been very gratifying, because, like you say, people with more hobbies brings in the more interesting people. And it's really great to work with the young men and women as they grow and mature. I find myself with playing chess across the board from 7-year-olds, and I sit down with them, and here I am, this 60-year-old, and they're looking up at me and saying, do I look big to you? Do I look scary to you? Well, did you look at our ratings before we started? Because according to the ratings, you are bigger than me. and all of a sudden their minds expand and they get really focused on the game, and then I lose. But because I can't stand to see a 7-year-old cry. I'm much better when I'm playing against crusty old men rather than cute little kids. But it's a challenge on so many different levels, not just the physical for fencing or the mental for chess, but also the social, because every time you're in a hobby, you're with other people. I do some scuba diving on occasion, and it reminds you that you have to connect with other people, because if you are not very closely connected with your buddy, you can very easily get into trouble. If you are closely connected with the people that you're diving with, your chances of survival are much better.
Fantastic. If you would have the chance to talk to Donald Trump about systemic thinking, what would you say to him? Got you there.
That's difficult.
I know.
Thank you for a wonderful mental challenge.
I thought I came up with this while listening to you with chess, and I thought when you play chess with Donald Trump, he'd probably tell you that you're checkmate when you're not. So what's your idea on his politics, and what would you say to him coming from your heart?
My first thought is I'm not sure we could have a good conversation.
Because he does not do conversation.
It's that, yeah. I think that's part of it. Also, there's a difference. I saw an analysis recently that suggested that his mental capacity is that of a teenager.
Yeah. Based
on his conversations, his writings, his speeches, these sorts of things. And having dealt with teenagers, I cannot disagree with that assessment. However, he's an old teenager, and he does not seem to want to learn and grow, and that would make a conversation very difficult. So I suppose in having a conversation with him, if I could get him, if he was to be interested in any kind of systems thinking and how it might benefit him, one of the tremendous benefits that we've seen from knowledge mapping, from developing strategic plans or theoretical models, is that we start to see how every action that we have impacts others and then comes around to impact us. The systemic or cybernetic interconnections of how the world works that we don't really understand. And that working, because of many different variables, the world is so complex, and that we don't really understand what's going on, it makes it possible and seemingly desirable to work for one's own benefit at the expense of others, which causes all sorts of problems down the road. But if he were willing to talk about it, to learn from it, I would love to sit down with him and have a conversation, mapping out his understanding, and from a structural perspective, what is missing. And if he understood what is missing from his own understanding, how he could benefit himself more by helping others rather than hurting others. And I think that could lead to some interesting new understandings.
Yes, so you would invite him to a perspective of complexity and learning. Yeah. As you talked about, he's a teenager. Friedrich Nietzsche once said that his society and time does not reach puberty any longer. When I look at societies today, especially Western societies and consumerist societies, my opinion is we cannot leave puberty any longer. So taking this into mind, what's your perspective on modern society and on communication problems today?
Thank you, Gita, for asking such simple questions.
We're not boring here.
Let me start by reflecting or drawing a parallel with the academic world. In the academic world, with the natural sciences, we can see that there has been a scientific revolution. The natural sciences went from very simplistic linear understandings and developed more systemic understandings, and then through the scientific revolution reached a level of maturity as a science. The social sciences started out with very simplistic understandings, and we are perhaps in the early stages of a revolution. We have not reached puberty yet. We're not even in the teenage years of confusion and conflict and trying to become mature. We don't even know what mature looks like. And maybe that's part of the problem for society as a whole. We had some lovely conversations recently with some people who were talking about the event horizon, the what's the other word? The people who are looking
Singularity.
Singularity. Thank you. I don't know what that looks like. I think I know how part of the path to how we might get there, but I don't know what it looks like on the other side. Whereas human teenagers growing up, they know what an adult is supposed to be. In society today, we don't know what it looks like, what it means to be a mature society. So we have instead many different individual visions of what things are supposed to be like. And because of the explosion of postmodern ideas, we have so many visions and so many differences that it seems that none of them is really better than the other. So we end up with people focusing on very narrow reductionist parts of their vision. And that goes more to the core of your question, I think, that people in their communications are trying to push those single individual pieces. They're one little tiny part of the puzzle, if you will, rather than pulling back and trying to understand the entire complexity of it. And part of that is because I think they do not have an understanding of systems thinking, or they are also under so much pressure that they feel it is essential, critical. They are frightened into focusing on a small part of it. And I can't quote my sources at the moment, but it seems to me there's a lot of studies that fear and tension and stress cause us to focus more and more narrowly on those survival things. So if people could relax a little bit, learn a little bit about systems thinking, and start to make those connections both among people and among ideas, then I think they will learn the value, as we have as international scholars, the intellectual challenge and joy of reaching out and making those connections, even just because it's a fun and exciting thing. Going back to the science fiction thing, how neat it is to jump in to a whole nother world and not feel threatened. I saw my son do this as a young man. As he was as a young teenager, he was going off and getting in with all these strange groups, the goths, the punks, and I as an adult and as a parent, I'm nervous. It's like, what road is he going to go down? And I realized after some conversations that he is not dedicating his life to any one group. he is exploring and experimenting in his abilities to work in all these different groups. And I think that is just such a fantastic thing that we need to do as teenagers growing up and as a society if we are to get through puberty. And that might be the biggest challenge for society, is understanding how to connect. And that's part of why we wrote the book, and I'm developing more processes for people to develop understandings of systems thinking without learning all the jargon, without having to learn a different language. Simply making those connections, seeing some value, and then moving on to life. Sort of a reductionist approach to developing a systems perspective. Got to start where the client is and help them to move forward as best they can.
Fantastic. You took the last question out of my hands.
Oh.
And we have reached our half hour, and it was such a short time and so informative and fun to talk with you. Stay with me a little. I'm now shutting down the record. Thank you very much for your time, Steven. Thanks to the audience for listening and watching. Have a lovely time.